One of the world's most popular mountains is Mount Sinai. The mountain is significant to Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, three of the world's major religions, even though it does not claim to be the tallest. However, in addition to tourists, scientists and skeptics also flock to Mount Sinai. The shocking discoveries that scientists have made on Mount Sinai are shown to you in this video. Mount Sinai is well known for hosting Israel during their journey out of slavery in Egypt. However, a number of sites have been suggested by various scholars, so the precise location of Mount Sinai is still up for grabs. Even scientists have voiced their opinions on the matter, but when have scientists ever reached a consensus on something? Today, the granite peak at 2,285 meters above sea level in the south-central Sinai Peninsula, between Israel and Egypt, is Mount Sinai's most well-known location. Mount Everest, on the other hand, is 8,850 meters high. This location has long been accepted as the actual site by many scholars of the major faith traditions, including Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, despite the fact that scholars disagree on the exact path that the Israelites took during their exodus from Egypt. Since Eusebius of Caesarea's first recorded visit in the 4th century AD, and St. Helena's pilgrimage during her travels in the region from 384 AD, pilgrims, scholars, and hermits have frequented this site. During the early Messianic Christian era, the region was frequently visited by mystics and pilgrims seeking spiritual enlightenment, possibly including Paul the Apostle. The famous monastery of St. Catherine was built in 538 AD at the foot of the mountain. It is possibly the oldest continuously inhabited Christian monastery in the world. It is maintained by the Orthodox Church of Mount Sinai and has a library of ancient manuscripts, including a Bible codex written in Greek from the 4th century. In the meantime, you might be surprised to learn that Judaism has a less favorable view of Mount Sinai's location. Because the mountain itself was not inherently significant or holy, rabbinic teaching holds that the actual location of Mount Sinai does not hold a significant place in Jewish traditions. Instead, God lived on the mountain when the law was given. To put it another way, the events that took place there made Mount Sinai a holy place. But Mount Sinai became just another mountain after the Torah was given and the covenant was made. However, people have continued to speculate. You might be surprised to learn that Saudi Arabia is mentioned by other researchers as a potential location for Mount Sinai. Saudi Arabia, the birthplace of Islam, is similar to the land of Midian. Well-known scholar Charles Beck suggested Mount Bergier, which is located northeast of the Gulf of Aqaba. However, French scholar Jean Koenig suggests the volcanic peak of Halal, while Lois Musil and H. Philby point to Jebel al-Manifa near Wadi al-Harab. However, Ron Wyatt's theory that Mount Sinai was in a place called Jebel Lawz is by far the most controversial. Interestingly, this American scholar was particularly adept at locating biblical sites. He claimed to have discovered the Red Sea crossing, the Ark of the Covenant, Noah's Ark, Sodom and Gomorrah, and other biblical archaeological treasures. Why his theory is based on his interpretation of Exodus 3. 1. Mount Sinai is in the ancient land of Midian. Because Moses was in charge of Jethro's flocks, he reasoned, the mountain of God Moses encountered had to be in Midian. 2. Jethro was helpfully a Midian minister. Wyatt came to the conclusion that the real Mount Sinai had to be east of where the miraculous Red Sea crossing took place, in what is now western Saudi Arabia. The best explanation was Jabal al-Lawz, which had the highest peak in the entire western Saudi Arabian mountain range, and claimed to have been discovered in 1978 in Nawaba and the Gulf of Aqaba, the eastern branch of the Red Sea. In 1984, Wyatt and his 2 sons bravely and illegally entered Saudi Arabia to investigate and photograph the region. However, they were apprehended. They were detained by the Saudis for 78 days as Israeli spies, and their films were taken away. Wyatt then went on a treasure hunting mission and returned to Saudi Arabia legally. He believed that at the bottom of the Red Sea could be the Mountain of God, Egyptian treasures in the area, and the remains of Pharaoh's enormous army. Researchers produced impressive results by following delegations. The subsequent years, the majority of scholars agree that these are still speculative and devoid of archaeological proofs that are definitive and indisputable. According to Wyatt's findings, the famous mountain is really just a big pile of granite rocks about a quarter of a mile from its base. Bulls, cows, and oxen are among the bovines depicted in the bear's petroglyphs. Wyatt asserted that this was the great Israeli altar in Saudi Arabia at the base of Mount Sinai, possibly the one mentioned in the story about the golden calf. After quoting a Saudi archaeologist from Riyadh University who claimed that these were cows and bulls in the Egyptian style that had never been found anywhere else in Saudi Arabia, there is more convincing evidence that Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia, and the clue comes from the Bible itself once more. According to Deuteronomy 9:21, Moses threw the ashes of the golden calf he had burned while ascending Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments tablets into a brook that flowed down from the mountain. They claim that this ancient watershed, which is filled with large water-polished boulders, is clear evidence of a fast-moving, strong stream that carved its path down the mountainside after emerging from a rock, despite the fact that the markings of a large water flow snaking down the mountainside appear to start from nowhere, which would suggest a supernatural intervention. However, the water flow appears to start from nowhere, in a dry landscape. This was the miracle they had been looking for. They also speculated that Moses was prevented from entering the Promised Land because he struck a large rock that appeared to be split in half when he struck it to bring water to the nation that was thirsty. However, does this amount to sufficient evidence to support the assertion that this is the actual Mount Sinai? Numerous academics contend that photographs alone are insufficient to support the claim and that a team of geologists must carefully examine the rock in order to confirm the researchers' assertion. In addition, they point to the fact that, despite the fact that the area is considered to be an arid desert, it receives approximately 4 inches of rain annually, that is, 100 millimeters, and that heavy rains, mostly tropical monsoons, frequently result in flash floods that are large enough to have polished these rocks. In Israel, between Petra and Kadesh Barnea, in the Negev desert, there's a third possible location of Mount Sinai. The pioneers of this study, who go by the Hebrew name Hawk Harkom, or Mountain of Saffron, made their case based on the idea that the ancient Israeli traveled in a fairly straight line from Petra across the Sinai Peninsula to Hawk Harkom, which they claim is the Negev mountain, scriptural Mount Sinai. Teams of researchers and excavators discovered shrines, altars, stone circles, stone pillars, and more than 40,000 rock engravings throughout the vast plateaus that surrounded the site. The Israeli researchers propose that Hakarkoma is the biblical Mount Sinai on the basis of these and other local findings. In spite of the way that the pinnacle of the found strict action at the site originates before the departure from Egypt, which is generally dated somewhere in the range of 1600 and 1200 BC, to make up for the delay, the Israeli analysts dated the mass migration from Egypt somewhere in the range of 2350 and 2000 BC, referring to other archaeological proof to back up their hypothesis. Albeit such revisionist sequences are not new, they are oftentimes dismissed in academic circles. One early refusal of the Hakakum guarantee battles that the kind of early Bronze Age strict things and designs found at the site have been found in huge numbers in different areas in the Negev and Sinai districts, demonstrating they are not remarkable to this site. But what exactly is the significance of Mount Sinai to Christians? The response is easy. Numerous shocking events involving the Israeli took place there. The Israelis arrived in the Sinai desert after fleeing Egypt, according to biblical accounts. From the mountain, God spoke to Moses and informed him that he would appear to the people as a cloud. After the Israelis had completed their preparations, the long-awaited day arrived. Moses was summoned to the mountain by God, but he was informed that the people were not permitted to ascend the mountain and that the area should be declared holy. Anyone who broke the law was put to death right away. Then at that point, God talked and gave the 10 decrees and different guidelines. After God spoke, Moses followed his orders and descended the mountain. The Israelis said they would follow the Lord. Moses heard from God on the 7th day. He instructed him to enter the cloud, which he did for 40 days and 40 nights. Moses was given instructions from God on how to build the tabernacle, which had the Ark of the Covenant inside. He likewise indicated the ministers' articles of clothing and sanctification. Moses was conversing with God while the Israelis became impatient at the foot of the mountain. In a significant act of disobedience, they made a golden calf and began worshiping it. God became incensed and compromised individuals with a debacle. Moses, on the other hand, begged God to be merciful to them, and God agreed. Moses saw the Israelis worship the golden calf as he descended the mountain. He became enraged and threw the 2 tablets to the ground, shattering them. His own anger eventually took over. He would make his way back to Mount Sinai and give the Lord 2 more tablets. He came back to write the 10 Commandments on the tablet for 40 days and 40 nights. After learning their lesson, the Israelis were patient this time. He brought a commandment back to the Israelis, which served as the foundation for the Israelis' judicial system for thousands of years. In the meantime, the location where the Israelis crossed the Red Sea during their epic escape from the Egyptians' grasp is even more controversial than the current location of Mount Sinai. Researchers have presented a number of theories, but the Thomas Research Foundation, which places the crossing at the Gulf of Aqaba, is one of the most well-known. When the Israelis realized that they were ensnared between the soldiers and the sea, Moses prayed to God to divide the waters so that they could safely pass. The Egyptians who tried to follow were then hit again by the waves, crushing their chariots and suffocating the military in the Red Ocean. The narrative, Tracking Down the Pile of Moses. Researchers led by security analyst Ryan Melrose presented their findings in The Real Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia. It also comes after researchers believe that radiocarbon dating demonstrates that Moses crossed the Red Sea. After claiming that the peak Jebel Lawz in the Middle Eastern Kingdom is actually Mount Sinai, Mauro and his team made the discovery. The findings indicate that the Israelites entered modern Saudi Arabia via the Nuweiba beach. Israelis fleeing would be able to easily walk across the 8-mile-wide crossing. A Scottish theory about Mount Sinai appears to be supported by the location, which is only 75 miles from where they would have arrived after crossing the Red Sea. Dr. Glenn Fritz's study of the New Weber crossing is cited by experts from the Doubting Thomas Research Foundation. The location of the beach, which is 5 miles long and surrounded on both sides by mountains, appears to be in line with the biblical narrative. The estimated 3 million Israelis who fled Egypt would have had a room there. The Nueva Lambert extension was likewise found, which gives off an impression of being a characteristic development at a profundity of around 33 meters that the Israelis could stroll across. What's more, most intriguingly, researchers accept that surprising coral arrangements look like chariots that would have sunk when the Red Ocean crashed over the Pharaoh. Bible scholars believe that cave paintings of cows, which add to the story of the golden calf, are evidence that the site near Jabal al-Lawz was once an Israelite camp. The researchers attempted to enter the site to investigate, but Saudi police prevented them from doing so. Unfortunately, the site may soon be destroyed due to its location within the proposed Saudi megacity Neom's footprint, which is 33 times larger than in New York. The list goes on. Scholars are also divided on whether or not the Great Exodus from Egypt ever took place, and when the Great Exodus of Israel from Egypt took place, with some groups choosing dates that are up to 200 years apart. In point of fact, arguments regarding the Exodus's timing frequently take precedence over those regarding its actuality. The Exodus is said to have occurred in the 13th century BC by some scholars, corresponding to either the Ramesside period or the Egyptian 19th dynasty. To begin, the biblical account of Israel's exodus from Egypt's 3 locations is based on Ramesside period Egyptian place names from the 13th to 11th centuries BCE. As per the Good Book, the Israelis had to fabricate the store urban areas of Pithom and Ramses as slaves. After the 10 plagues, the Israelis left Egypt and famously crossed the Yam Suf, also known as the Red Sea or the Reed Sea, whose waters were miraculously split for them. Pithimarim and seasoned yams are biblical names that correspond to the Egyptian place names Pi Ramesses, Pi Adam, and Part Yaf. These 3 place names first appear together in Egyptian texts during the Ramesside period. Around 1085 BCE, Egypt's 3rd intermediate period began, and the name Pi Ramesses was no longer used. It didn't come back until much later. A 13th century exodus is also supported by a worker's house in western Thebes. In the 1930s, archaeologists from the University of Chicago investigated the Western Thebes mortuary temple of Aya and Horemheb, Egypt's final 2 pharaohs of the 18th dynasty. The temple was constructed by Aya in the 14th century BCE. However, when Horemheb became pharaoh, he assured it and added to it. He controlled from the late 14th to the mid-1300 years BCE. Every instance of Aya's name was taken out by Horemheb and replaced with his own. Petty, but that was how the pharaohs did things. However, the temple was eventually demolished during Ramses IV's reign in the 12th century BCE. During the excavations, the University of Chicago researchers discovered a house and a portion of another house that belonged to the workers tasked with tearing down the temple. The house's overall layout is similar to the four-room dwellings that Israelis built during the Iron Age. The Theban house was constructed of wattle and daub, in contrast to the Israelite models, which were typically made of stone. The construction of this house is significant. Egypt, while the Israelis were constructing houses in Canaan with 4 rooms. Some people think that the Theban house's builders were either proto-Israelis or members of a group that was related to the Israelis. This is because of the similarities. Another piece of evidence in support of the Exodus is the Ono Master Khan Aminob. The Honor Master Khan Aminoba is a sorted rundown of Egyptian words and the third moderate time frame. The Semitic place name at Brkt, which refers to the Python Lakes, is written in high erratic on the papyrus. In Egyptian sources, the Snake Lakes were given the Semitic name rather than the Egyptian one. It's possible that people who spoke Semitic lived in the area for long enough for their name to take over from the original. The world-renowned Egyptologist Hans Gudeke has asserted that there is additional independent evidence for the Exodus. He claimed that Egyptian writings contained the evidence. The Great Sprios Artemidos inscription, which dates back to the 15th century BCE, is a royal declaration of Hatshepsut's accomplishments in hieroglyphic form. Gudeke asserts that the Exodus's pharaoh was a woman. Hatshepsut says in this text that she has finally dealt with immigrants or people who didn't do their jobs. These newcomers, according to Gudeke, are Israelis. Their steps were swallowed up by the earth. Gudeke claims that this passage is referring to their drowning because of the water's destruction of their steps. In short, the Egyptian version says that the Israelis drown and the Egyptians win over their opponents. This is not surprising in a world where rulers simply stole the success of their predecessors. Another compelling piece of evidence supports the Exodus in the Bible itself. A history of enslavement is probably true, despite the fact that the evidence is not exactly scientific. The narrative of a people fleeing humiliating slavery in Exodus suggests elements that are historically plausible. In most cases, stories of triumph and glory are the only ones that are passed down from generation to generation. A past filled with bondage is probably going to contain components of truth. What nation would invent such a crazy story that they were slaves in Egypt and that they left their country and came to this country, and then make that the kernel of all their history, said a great Israeli archaeologist once. There is a core of truth there, no matter how much you try to minimize it. Do you believe that there was a great Exodus? Please share your thoughts in the following section.